if Putin does decide to use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, first of all, I think NATO would respond with an overwhelming conventional response, but this would give NATO the chance to use a tactical nuclear missile.
Moving back home, the US is reportedly planning to station nuclear weapons in the UK for the first time in 15 years because of growing threats from Russia. At least that's according to the Daily Telegraph. It's seen procurement documents from the US Defence Department that include plans to upgrade RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk so it can house the missiles. Joining me now is Colonel Hamish de Bretton Gordon, the former British Army officer and a chemical weapons expert. Welcome to the show, Colonel de Bretton Gordon.
Thanks, Ed.
Do you believe this story in the Telegraph?
I think it's probably plausible, and particularly the situation at the moment. On Tuesday, we saw the doomsday clock being reset to 90 seconds to midnight, really indicating what experts think is the likelihood of nuclear war. On Wednesday, Patrick Saunders, Chief of the General Staff, warning that the British military really is going to be very challenged to face the current Russian threat. And of course, on Thursday, Putin visited Kaliningrad in a really provocative move. So I think with Putin threatening nuclear or tactical nuclear weapons, and these are tactical, if I just explain, you have strategic nuclear weapons, which is what UK has, the Trident missiles, which are, 500 plus kilotons that can destroy cities, and the tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons, which these American ones are. We don't have them, but the Russians have a hell of a lot of them and have threatened to use them in Ukraine. So I think it's a really sensible move. I think it will make nuclear war less likely rather than more likely, because if Putin does decide to use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, first of all, I think NATO would respond with an overwhelming conventional response, but this would give NATO the chance to use a tactical nuclear missile. And although I think this is very unlikely, when you're dealing with a tyrant like Putin, whose election is coming up soon, and his special military operation in Ukraine has not progressed as he thought, he will respond to strength. And this to me is strength. If we show weakness, our soft underbelly, then he would exploit it. So, yeah, I think it's a good move, and it should make Europe safer. The key thing is, of course, we need to stop the war in Europe as soon as possible.
So it is, to a certain extent, a rerun of Margaret Thatcher's decision to allow Ronald Reagan to base nuclear-armed cruise missiles in Britain in the 1980s, which caused huge protests. But without wishing to lead the witness, it seems to me that did work effectively by telling the then Soviets that Britain was prepared to take serious measures to counter Soviet aggression, and arguably began the process of ending the Cold War.
Yes, absolutely. As I commanded the UK's chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defence regiment for a number of years, and have been intimately involved in these sort of things. Absolutely, the Greenham Common, as people remember, and all the protests there, that certainly that kept the peace, and that really precipitated a lot to the end of the Cold War. I think in exactly the same position now. I mean, the nuclear threat is higher now than it ever was in the Cold War. So we've absolutely got to do these things. Now, of course, there'll be protests, but actually, people, if they could understand that there are nuclear weapons, and nuclear weapons have kept the peace for 75 years, but the proliferation to people like the Iranians and other members of the Axis of Evil and North Koreans, really make this world more unstable. And these tyrants, as I said before, recognize strength, not weakness. So I am more safe in my bed tonight knowing that these tactical nuclear weapons will be in the UK than not. And people are saying, is this part of the UK sort of chain? Can we stop them being used? These missiles fit on F-35 fighters. they will take off from Lakenheath or wherever they're being kept, and they will be presumably in international airspace when they launch them. So although I am sure the US would not use these without UK consent, but a lot of people are worried about President Trump potentially getting back into the White House and sort of things he would do. Again, I like to reassure people. We hear a lot about the red button, and Ed, I'm sure you know from your time as a minister, these are not red buttons, can't be pressed at a whim by a prime minister or a tyrannical president, be it Putin or anybody else. Just because they feel like it. There are a lot of checks and balances in place.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Colonel Hamish de Bretton Gordon, talking to us about the prospect of American nuclear missiles being based at RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk.